Hello everyone, welcome to Menno's chess channel. My name is Menno, and today we will be trying to solve 20 puzzles on chesspuzzle.net's puzzle client without making any mistakes. Now, because these puzzles are the first 20 puzzles, all of them will be in the beginner to intermediate range. This means that in all the puzzles, the combinations take up to 5 moves at most, and so calculation doesn't go very deep. So it will be relatively easy for me to share my thought process with you, and I hope that by doing so, I teach you how to think tactically yourself in your own games. Let's begin. Now in this first puzzle, let's look at checks, captures, and attacks. We can capture the pawn, but the white king is attacking our knight, so that wouldn't be very good. So seeing this, looking at all the captures and attacks, we have already noticed that our knight here is hanging. We can move this knight with check in two ways. We can move it here, where he can attack both our knight and our pawn, which isn't very good for us. Or we can move it here, attacking both the bishop and the king. Now, because he cannot take the knight, and we are attacking his bishop, he has to move his king, and then we win his bishop. And in this position, white's pawn is advancing towards the queening square, but so is our pawn. And we are to move, and we have the same amount of moves needed. Now, an important detail is that our king prevents his king from blocking the queening square for our pawn, so we can confidently move up our pawn, and because he keeps moving his king, he is even more losing. In this position, we can also look at checks, captures, and attacks. We can capture this, but it's defended by the bishop. We can check him here, but it's defended. But we can also check him here, where he cannot take our knight, so he has to move here or here. And we also attack his queen, which is of course much more valuable. So by doing this, we win his queen. White to win. In this position, the king, which is in the corner, which is very important to notice, does not have many moves. Our king is blocking these squares, and the only squares the king has left are these squares. Now, if you want to look at all the checks we have, and there's one of them, we can see if we can take away all those squares in one go. But we also have to look at if he can block or take. The only check is to move our queen to h7, which takes away, let's just remove some squares. This square, this square, this square, and this square. He cannot block or take, so this is checkmate. Black to win. Yet again, we are attacking this piece many times. But of course, we don't want to trade a queen for a rook. But if you notice, the king and the rook are on one line, which means that this pawn, if it were to move from the g-file, would put his own king in check, which cannot be done. So we can take this knight with check, and he cannot take with the pawn. So we can keep taking, and in the end, we are up a rook. White to win. He is not preventing us from promoting, so we promote our pawn to a queen. He checks us, and if we were to go here, we would lose our queen, so we should go here, which is the only other move. White to win. Let's see, his king is over here, but what can we do about that? Not much, but let's look at attacks. We are attacking his queen. He has a few attacks too, a few captures as well. He can capture this pawn, but it's covered by the king. He can also check us here, but it's covered by not just one, but two rooks and a king. So there's no danger in us taking this. We can safely take this queen, and we are up. He takes our piece, and now this piece is hanging, and we win. Black to win. Well, when you have a dark squared bishop, you have to mind, also when you're the opponent of the person with the dark squared bishop, your dark squares. Let's look at what's on the dark squares. There's a pawn, a pawn, a king, very important, a bishop, so there is a contender, and there's also a rook. Now, can we attack two of these, which are also undefended, in one move? The answer is yes. We move our bishop to e3 with check. Now, he blocks the bishop, which is the best move. If he moved his king, we would take his rook, and he would not be able to retake our bishop. But of course, we do not want to trade bishops, we want a rook for a bishop. So we take the rook, he takes, and since this pawn is very dangerous, we take the pawn as well. White to win yet again. If you look at this position, what you might notice is that if I were to go here and pin his knight, he can ignore me, and if I take with check, he still has two pawns right here. So we cannot focus on the pawns. Instead, we have to focus on our own pawn here, which is almost queening. Luckily for us, he has no checks, so we can do this uninterrupted, and instead of advancing his own aims, he moves his king, which doesn't actually waste the tempo, because before he was standing on this diagonal, and if we promote to a queen, we would have checked him. White to win. This pawn threatens to go here, so we might as well take it, removing the threat of that pawn queening. And here he is threatening to take, move away, and promote, which takes 5 moves. We only need 4 moves, and it's us to move, so we can push, 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 and push. And we win the game. White to checkmate. Yet again, when we have to checkmate, we look to recognize that we can at the king. Is the king a safe piece? Well, no. There's a rook here, a pawn here, a king here. This rook has a lot of potential energy down the g-file, and this knight can throw in a check. Now, you might think, Menno, this knight, a pawn to our cause, can be taken. But is that important? Well, the answer is no. Taking it is actually the only legal move. It's a very forcing move. But that's not the point. Forcing somebody to do something doesn't equate to it being good, as is forcing somebody to receive $50 from your wallet. It has to have an aim. In this case, this rook is taking away all the squares, and we can check the king on d8. Now, he can block with 2 pieces, but those pieces are not coordinating very well. This rook doesn't defend this rook or the other way around, and this bishop isn't helping. So we take, he has to block, and it is checkmate. Next puzzle. It is black to win. Let's look at our moves. If we move the king here and attack the rook, it has only 1 square, but we can't attack it again, so to me, that move doesn't win, and in a puzzle, you have to make the winning move immediately. What I also see is that this rook is taking away these squares, this bishop is taking away all these squares, and this pawn here is taking away these squares. So that leaves us with 2 squares. This rook can attack both of them, so this is checkmate in 1 move. In this position, we can check the king. There are 2 ways, and when you check him one way, here, he can take your knight, and I don't see what you can do about that. We can also take this pawn, which is defended once, but attacked twice. But if we check him here, an option we haven't looked at yet, we can simply win this bishop. Now the reason why is, he cannot take our knight, and he has to move away from defending the bishop, because from here, the only way to defend the bishop is to go here or here, but those squares have been taken away by his own pawns. They are traitors, so we win his bishop. Now let's look at the fall position. In this position, my pawn is taking away this, my king is taking away these squares, so all these squares are not available. And of course, h4 isn't that important as he cannot move there. But even more important, or I guess equally as important, this knight is taking away these 2 squares. So the king has only 3 squares left and nothing to block on this line. We can exploit this by taking away the last squares with our rook, delivering checkmate. Black to win. Let's look at our position here. As you can see, we are attacking this twice. The problem, however, is that it's also defended twice. But what if instead of that, we push the pawn, attacking his bishop? If the bishop moves, well, in this case we can take it, and if it moves here, we take this pawn, and it is very bad for him. But let's look at other moves. Do we have an alternative? Well, I think we do. We can check him here. This bishop defends the pawn, and the pawn defends the bishop. If he doesn't take, but instead goes here, we can check him here. He has to take, and we check again with mate, because the king is backed up into a corner with nowhere to go. So if we go here, he has to take with the rook, and we win the rook with check, and we have a winning position. 5 more puzzles to go. And as you can see, there is a very logical approach to solving these puzzles. In fact, it is not that hard once you get the hang of the ideas. Let's look at this one. In this puzzle, his pieces are awfully close, and this pawn threatens to come closer. Now, our knight can check him and then take the pawn, but then, if he checks us here, where do we go? Well, there's room here, and there's room here. If we move further and further away, eventually we can either block or take the piece that's checking us. So by taking away this pawn, I believe that the attack is not there anymore. And we win the game. Now in this position, we have a check, which doesn't really work because he can go here or here. But we can also check him with the queen in 2 different ways. One of them forces a trade of queens, because if he takes, we take with check and the queens are traded, and if he doesn't or blocks, we can also trade the queen. But that doesn't look like it's winning at all. I mean, we are up a bunch of pawns, but it's a bishop versus a rook, and we're only up 2 pawns, so that would be a very hard game to win. That doesn't seem like an intermediate or beginner solution. Instead, this check looks far more powerful. Now, the reason why I'm looking at this is because it takes away these squares, and the only legal move is to blockade. When that happens, we have to look at our other moves. If we take, we trade queens, and again, we are not really winning this position. Instead, however, we can look at a way to involve our other piece, which is very important to do in your games, to always develop and involve many pieces. This bishop can check here, which forces this king to move backwards, relinquishing defense of the queen. So he has to move backwards, and now he is checkmated. White to win. We are getting closer and closer to our goal. What I'm seeing here is that we have 1, 2, 3, 4, 5 pawns, and he has 4. Our pawns are doubled, but I believe that if this piece were gone, we could easily win this endgame, because the king is close enough to stop these 2 pawns. This pawn stops this pawn, and these are blockaded. So what we can do is we can attack his bishop because it's tied down to defending, and he moves away. Now, if we take this pawn and he takes this pawn, I believe we are in a winning position for the simple reason that this pawn is now a passed pawn, while he has nothing himself. Which means that we can distract him by threatening to promote our pawn, in turn winning more pawns, or even just promoting our pawn because he can't do anything. Now let's look at the next position. In this position, he isn't really threatening to do anything. This pawn isn't free, this pawn is, but the issue is he opens files for us if he takes the b pawn. Now, if we take this pawn with check, we gain what is known as a tempo, which means that the king has to move, and thus he doesn't really develop anything or help himself. If, however, we take with the queen, we have a piece which can attack on both lines and diagonals. So it might be very good to take off the queen instead, because if you look at the pieces, these are both undefended if the king has to move into the corner. So let's see. These pieces are undefended, and we can attack them in only one way with this queen, which does not lose anything, which is to go here. The rook moves, and this is more valuable, and we take his bishop. All right, yet another puzzle. Of course, we're solving puzzles, so I am not very surprised. Um, but yes, our queen is under attack. Well, this way, I guess. If we don't take the queen, we can take back. But this knight, which would be taking back our queen, is also attacking an undefended piece. Now, counting material, let's see. This equal, equal, and we are actually down exchange here. So let's see about the pawns, but we are up pawns. So material is equal here because we are down the exchange with up some pawns. If we take the queen, we take with check, and the king has no squares, so the king would have to take while we are attacking this undefended bishop. Now, if we were to take this bishop first, our queen would hang because the knight no longer defends, as it has been removed from the f4 square, where it defends the square h3. So let's look at our options. And I do not see anything else, so I believe the best move here is to take the queen and then take this bishop, winning material and getting a winning position. Let's see. In this position, this pawn can go down, but when it does, we can go down too. What I also see is that we have 3 pawns, where my opponent has 2. I've also noticed that while I said I was going to solve 20 puzzles, we've already reached 20. So this is extra. You're welcome. So if we go here, we lose the pawn, and this makes no sense. Instead, we can push our pawn, and now it threatens to win the game. We have to respond, and we threaten to go up all the way and win the game, which we are likely to do. Because if his king in that position, and if you want to, you can rewind and listen to my words and then look at the position again. We still promote. The king is too far away to stop our pawns from barreling down the board and promoting. So yes, we have solved 21 puzzles now. Not a number I intended, but that's okay. Without making any mistakes. I hope you thought that my way of teaching you was helpful. I hope you can take away something from this and use it in your own matches. This was Menno, and I wish you a very nice day. Goodbye.